Edgar and
Daisy and Rick Manos.
She was tired. She's got something going on.
A wedding or something like that.
Yeah, but she came sniffling and
oh, okay.
she's been really, really tired. Oh, well maybe they, I don't know what happened to Rick now. He's got his own car, but maybe he's getting lost. He was a little tired of the Iowa place.
All right, we'll start, since we have new people, we'll start with a reintroduction. This is a series of talks that I'm offering to Rosicrucian students and probationers in Latin America. And we're doing it by Skype. And it began with the recommendation of Max Heindel that all probationers should study physiology. And it was Max Heindel's claim that if we studied physiology, we would be more fit invisible helpers. And his dream was that people would gather together in groups and that they would study physiology together and eventually start healing centers together. That never happened. And so, personally, I started studying physiology something like 25 years ago or something like that. And I found it one of the most miraculous things I've ever studied because the human body is so perfect. Tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to be a little bit lightweight. Last night when we talked about how water is absorbed in the colon, we were talking about all the Scorpio processes that are involved in that. And that got to be pretty technical because we talked about sodium-potassium pumps and things of that nature. To begin with last time, we spoke a little bit about the difference between life and form. And Max Heindel wrote in several different places at several different times about the difference between life and form. And he spoke about it on different levels. We spoke of last evening about the difference between life and form in the physical world. That is the difference between the etheric subdivision of the physical world and the chemical subdivision. It was mentioned that materialistic science recognizes only the chemical subdivision and energy. According to materialistic science, there cannot be life on other planets. Rosicrucian mysticism, on the other hand, says that life can exist independent of chemical form. In fact, most of the living things that have vital life do live independent of physical forms. So, from our point of view, there can be life on or in other planets, and there can even be vital life in space. In fact, it's absurd to think that in the solar creative manifestation that the only expression and evolution of life can occur in one place on the skin of our planet. That would be a tremendous waste. So science recognizes that there is energy beyond the surface of the planets, though it has no knowledge of life ether. Now, if we speak of living forms in the chemical subdivision of the physical world, science is right in saying that there must be water. And the opinion of materialistic science is based on the necessity of water for biochemical interactions. They don't know about the life ether. As Christian mystics, we know that water has a very strong affinity to life ether, and that life ether is what is necessary for life to express in the chemicals in order for the life ether to come into them. Now, when reviewing the talk from last evening, there is a realization that there was a possible great misunderstanding. And in order to avoid that kind of a misunderstanding, we have to again take note of the difference between life and form, between the vital body and the chemical physical body. They are two different bodies. There is an interdependence between them, but each has different needs, and they work together cooperatively even though they have different needs. What we need to clarify and extend is, to avoid misunderstanding, is something that can help us live better lives. And that's what this is all about. We want to live better lives. The first thing to clarify is that even though water is taken into the dense physical body, mostly in the colon, that is not where life ether enters into the physical body. That we have to repeat. Water enters the dense physical body through a different activity than the way life ether enters the dense physical body. The Rosicrucian philosophy teaches that there are two ways that the flux of ether is taken into the vital body. The first way is directly from the etheric stream in sunlight. And it surrounds us in the etheric atmosphere. The way the Rosicrucian cosmic conception describes it, it comes in through the spleen. But it is the etheric spleen and not the physical spleen, because people can have a physical spleen removed and still live the rest of their life with a makeshift etheric spleen. Max Heindel describes it in a way that is awesome and beautiful. He says that a lot of blood runs through the spleen. Now, according to the Rosicrucian philosophy, a great part of the blood is a gas, an etheric gas, and it's not only the plasma, the fibrin, and the red blood corpuscles. There is also an etheric component. So it is the etheric spleen that brings in the ether. Now, it's not the same way that a plant brings in sunlight and fixes it into usable ether, but it is something more direct. It just comes flowing in. Now, when the life ether is taken into the blood, as it flows through the spleen, the blood is in a gaseous state. And when the blood gets to the area of the solar plexus, or when the etheric flow gets to the area of the solar plexus, the atom of the etheric vital body transforms the ethers. You might even say it personalizes the ethers, and it turns them into an etheric substance that is very valuable to that is valuable to life in the physical body. It's said to be a lovely, glowing, rosy fluid. This fluid passes through the etheric matrix of the chemical ether and life ether and the static matrix, and it brings life to it. This activity of the ether flow being personalized is done by its association in attunement to the seed atom of the vital body. Ooh. Ooh. The seed atom is a cumulative concentration or consequence of all of the etheric experience we've ever had since the beginning of the vital body in the sun period. It's so like it's a condensed experience that has the character of what we have done in all of these three periods, the sun period, the moon period, and the earth period. And this condensed experience has a life and character of its own. That's why I try to use the word personalization. And it vibrates the wisdom, you might say, or the knowledge that it has from experience. And that is what personalizes and makes the vital essence usable to us. So the seed atom is more than just a record book. It is a living experience. Not all the experience, but the essence of it. The essence of it that becomes almost something like a spiritual power. And the spirit does the transformation through that seed atom. Now the other way that life ether enters into the vital body is with food. Not all food is rich in life ether. Only the food that is raw and live and fresh. Food that still has the living ether in it. Now there's a lovely book that Max Steindl wrote called Occult Principles of Health and Healing. And in that book, Max Steindl makes it very clear that there are two distinctly different types of digestion. One is etheric digestion and one is chemical digestion. And the functioning of these two types of digestion and absorption and assimilation are opposite of each other. What is good for etheric digestion is not good for chemical digestion. And what is good for chemical digestion is not good for etheric digestion. Mildly cooked food makes chemical digestion and absorption and assimilation easier. At the same time, cooking drives out the life ether in the food and it becomes useless to the vital body. It's fine for the chemicals in the dense physical body, but there's no vitality there for the vital body. So if we want to have optimal health based on the food that we take in, we must have both cooked food and live, raw, vital food, as well as sunshine. The thing of it is that because of this opposite of the way the two work, the two types of food should be eaten at different times. Now, according to the Rosicrucian principle, I can't tell you what your diet should be, because each human is different. And we all have different seed atoms, both physical and etheric. So it is up to us to be self-reliant and to experiment with nutrition. And I've worked at it for a lot of years now, and I'll share what I do, which may not be right for you, but I'll just share it with you. 80% of my diet is fruits and vegetables. And the other 20% is nuts, seeds, and grains. And there's a little portion in there somewhere of naughty foods. Half of what I eat is raw and half is cooked. And the only animal food that I ever take into my body is occasionally I will take eggs and occasionally I will take in a little bit of honey. Now this is very different. I have a friend who is a probationer who lives in Buenos Aires who consumes enormous amounts of honey. To me it's almost unbelievable how much honey he eats. He's a very mental person, and the sugars, when you eat food, the sugars go to the brain, and honey is a reasonable sugar. For the etheric vital body, I take about a half a liter of fresh juice every morning and every evening. In the morning, it is juice from fresh organic greens. And the half liter in the evening is from organic carrot juice. You look over there, I have specialized equipment. Just standing on that counter is about $1,200 of juice extraction equipment. And I take the juices in, not for chemical nutrition, not at all. As soon as the juice is out of the juice press, I chug-a-lug it. Because I don't care about the chemical nutrition. I want to get that charge of ether. And I get it into me as quickly as possible, and the vital body absorbs it out of the GI tract. I gulp it down. And I eat some fresh fruit later on, and for a main meal, I eat a cooked meal every day, except now during summer school there's no time to cook. It's taken many years to get to this diet, and especially come to the self-control of it, because it's so easy being a high desire person to get out of control. I have to admit that I have to be extremely careful or I can get addicted to chocolate. But at any rate, whether it is coming in from sunlight or whether it is coming in from food, the vitality is taken into the etheric body, in the bloodstream, along with the food and the other things that the bloodstream carries. It then gets dispersed as the vital body needs it. So, we have two different things. From the large intestine, we get the water that we need for the vital essence to get within the chemical cells. Without that water, it can't get in. But the vital essence itself comes in through totally different means, either from food or from sunlight. So I didn't want to have some kind of misunderstanding of everything. Everything, the food and the vital essence and the oxygen and everything else is carried through the arteries and eventually through the capillaries, and it gets taken into the cells by osmosis usually. All right, more on this will be said either later in this talk or in another talk. Now let's get into the topic for this talk. At the time I first offered this talk, the sun was in Gemini. And following the lead of Max Heindel, I chose to have this talk be about the opposite sign, Sagittarius, so that it would be easier to get into the inner meanings. It probably won't always be that way because I have all sorts of things I want to do if I am able to continue with these kinds of talks. Now, if we look in the astrology books about Sagittarius and physiology and anatomy, not much is said. The books will say something, well, Sagittarius rules the thighs and the hips, and it doesn't say much more than that. And this is because mystical astrophysiology is a very young science. And when we study things like this, we are pioneers and we have to face all the difficulties that pioneers have to face. Very few people outside of probationers to the Rosicrucian order are interested in spiritual astrophysiology. Everybody wants fortune telling instead of applied astrology. So, if we want to, this gives us a chance to be real pioneers, and I must say, this has been one of the greatest blessings in my life. It has reinvigorated interest in astrology in a different way. Now, last evening, we were pretty technical because we were talking about Scorpio. And Scorpio is one of those complicated signs. Tonight, when we're talking about Sagittarius, we're talking about Sagittarius and Jupiter, and they're not complicated at all. Jupiter is what you see is what you get. It lets it all hang out. The virtue of Sagittarius and Jupiter is lightness and simplicity. So we're going to do something with very simple Jupiterian notions. And what we're going to say is going to be so light, it's almost trite. And there's not going to be anything difficult to understand at all. So let's begin by contrasting Jupiter with its planetary opposite, Saturn. Saturn rules things that are small. Jupiter rules things that are large. And the process of enlarging or the process of diminishing are also Jupiterian and Saturnian. The process of making things small is called contraction. And the process for enlarging things is called expansion. Except in physiology, when we're doing something that is expanding, it is called dilation. Now, each of these processes, concentration and expansion, has a corresponding psychological attitude. Concentration is a word or an attitude that goes along with contraction. When we concentrate, we bring things down to a point, and that is contraction. If we relax, and if we relax to the point that we are spiritualizing, relaxation is then what produces expansion. Jupiter is by far the most relaxed and the most expansive of all of the planets. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at relaxation as a key word in trying to understand one kind of expansion in the human dense physical body. Now, Jupiter rules goodness. Sagittarian people are so beloved because they're always trying to be good or looking for the good or something like that. So we'll begin with that to try to get at the attitude behind the physical condition. Very early in the Rosicrucian cosmoconception, Max Heindel makes a very strong statement about goodness and what some people call evil. It's a very Jupiterian statement. He says there is no evil. There's only good, and what we think is evil is good in the making. Well, that's a really positive statement. This is especially important for us to keep in mind when we practice astrology. Because when we practice astrology, we're going to be seeing the faults and weaknesses of others. And when we're in that place where we can see, aha, he's got that in there, that gives us a tendency to superiority and gives us a tendency to pass judgment on them. And if we do that, that harms both the astrologer and it harms the person who is being judged harshly. This is why Max Heindel tells us to always look for the good. And he goes so far as to say that if most people had clairvoyance and could see the effects of their thoughts, they would change their ways as quickly as possible. He says thoughts are things. And they are things that when we are thinking about other people, we are actually hurling thought forms at them. And it's almost something like a war of throwing stones at each other, or like kids in the sandbox throwing sand at each other. In astrology, Saturn is the planet that is least likely to receive positive judgment. Nobody likes Saturn, or almost nobody likes Saturn. Even though Saturn is as important to the good as every other planet, it's still unliked. Saturn never lets us get away with anything. And that's really very good. If you can't get away with anything, you're bound to be closer to the center of the truth. Now, we're trying to get at relaxation. And if we are relaxing, we must have something to relax. And the something that we relax is tension. Immediately, when people hear the word tension, they become negative, just like they become negative when they hear about Saturn, who rules tension. Tension is very important in the dense physical body. And even the basic maintenance of the physical body requires tension. As long as a person is alive, there is tension in the dense physical body, and it is necessary, and therefore it is good. Now this can be demonstrated by the moment of death. At the moment of death, when the tension in the body is released, there's a release of urine. And sometimes there's even a release of fecal matter. This is because during life there is that unconscious tension holding things together, holding things closed, holding things in place. But not all tension is good for the health of the body. There is tension that's produced by fear and worry and hardening selfish desires, and that is detrimental to the dense physical body. It pulls at things and makes things hard. You know, some people just want to go up to them and pet them or something to get them to relax. Now, those kinds of thoughts come from the bad side or the misused side of Saturn and Capricorn. When that lower nature, which Max Heindel calls the animal soul in the desire, gets its grip on the physical body, it won't let go. And in the same way that we said that we expend a tremendous amount of energy in maintaining the sodium-potassium balance, more than in anything else in our body, the energy is spent in the sodium-potassium balance, maintaining it. Enormous amounts of psychic energy and even some of the etheric energy is spent in maintaining personal egoism. Worry and fear are tiring. And if we have to defend our ego, even against imaginary things, we spend enormous amounts of psychic energy so that we can't receive intuitions and we can't think clearly. You can see this, that if you take a scrawny little person and that person flips out and they lose ego consciousness, it may take 4 people to get them into a straitjacket because there's that much strength, because they're no longer defending ego. They just let go. And then there are those miraculous things that happen when we think of others. My friend China is a nurse, and she works in pediatric intensive care. And one day she was working with a bunch of doctors, with somebody who had been crushed. And when you're crushed, it's very hard for doctors to handle because you can't tell what is broken inside. And so there's a lot of tension about all of that. And so to relieve the tension, one of the older doctors, while they were talking, said, well, I remember this case where this woman came in because she had run over her child with the car. And the doctor, he said, we doctors asked her what happened and then what happened next and what happened next. And he said, the woman said, well, I came screaming out of the car. And the doctor said, what happened next? And she said, I picked up the car. Now this is not a unusual thing. It is that in being freed from ego and thinking about self and defending self, for the love of her child, she released all of that psychic and physical energy. You know, a lot of our self-defense is because we actually don't like ourselves in many ways. We have inferiority complexes and that kind of a thing. Max Heindel points out the need to relax from desire body tension in Probationer's Letter number 60. If you can rivet that in your consciousness until you get home, read Probationer's Letter number 60, and it's very important. Now, Saturn and Jupiter are planetary opposites, and planetary opposites work cooperatively together. There is, like the whole idea of contraction and relaxation in the lungs, in the diaphragm, and getting things to move. This is another one of those homeostatic balances that we've been talking about in every talk. That the balance between between concentration and relaxation is necessary to maintain the integrity of health in the dense physical body. When there is a healthy balance between contraction and relaxation, we say the body has a healthy tone. We tone the body. Now, since this is about astrology and physiology for students like ourselves who want to become healers, it's wise to look at what happens when we lose tone. One example is what happens when there is too much relaxation. When there is too much relaxation and an attitude of indulgence in not wanting to do anything, the muscles become flaccid and weak. We don't want our muscles to be hard and tight like muscle builders, but we want to have them toned. I had a remarkable example of this working with a woman about 30 years ago, and it was really quite an experience to me. And a big part of that experience was that an event in this plane can be caused many different ways astrologically. It's like the recording angels have all kinds of ways to bring things about, and they choose exactly the right one for a person to grow the best. A woman came to me, and she was having miscarriages, and she wanted to know what was up. Now, if you look in most of the astrology books, they claim that miscarriages are due to Uranus and Mars, usually in the 5th and sometimes the 6th house. The idea is that with a sudden lurch or movement, the embryo, there's a break in the attachment of the embryo and it's left loose. Now, in many cases, that's true, but it wasn't in this case. Some other causes of miscarriage are sometimes caused by the moon in the 5th or 6th house, especially if the moon is afflicted by Mars. That indicates an acid condition in the lining of the embryo, and that acid condition makes it difficult to carry a child to term. In this case, none of those were there. And everything in the horoscope pointed to Jupiter conjoined Venus in Virgo in the 6th house. And it discombobulated me for a while, because these are the two most benefic planets and the two most relaxing planets. But that was what the problem was. They were too relaxed. And as a consequence, she did not have she was so relaxed in the abdominal muscles, she didn't have the abdominal muscles to hold in and carry the infant to term. She had two options. One would be to do things, exercise, to tone the abdominal muscles so that she could do it, or she would have to lie in bed throughout a pregnancy, usually on her back, so that there's nothing pushing out, or not so much pushing out. I never learned what she did, but my guess was that same Jupiter-Venus was such that she wasn't going to do physical exercise. That was just too much for her to want to do. All right. We want these little studies, and these are really very baby studies, very beginning studies. We want them to be practical. We are on probation to Christ, and we are on probation to the Rosicrucian Order. And a large part of the work of Christ and the Rosicrucian Order is redeeming humanity from its fallen state. And one of the consequences of that fall is illness and suffering. So healing has an important part to play in that activity. And that is one of the major activities of the Rosicrucian Order. They have put together the invisible helpers. And if we're very fortunate and we live the right kind of lives, we are guaranteed the right, by following the path to probation, eventually discipleship and initiation, we have a guaranteed path to becoming invisible helpers. Now, obviously, it's better to make corrections and prevent illness before it happens. In this regard, Max Heindel says it in several places when he's speaking about healing. He said the really important thing, most illness could be avoided by proper living. Literally, those are his words. Most illness could be avoided by proper living. By that, he meant not only hygiene and preventative medicine, but to him, that meant diet. Proper diet can prevent most illnesses. Now, anyone who has ever tried changing diet realizes that it's not just a simple change of habit. We have attachments and identifications. We have comfort foods. We have things that we depend on psychologically. We have things that we indulge ourselves in. And changing the habit means we have to change the indulgence, or we have to change the dependence. This is why it's so hard to establish a healthy way of living, because our whole psychology is bound up in unhealthy living. So we have to work a lot inwardly to change even the simple things that we eat. Now, in this psychological work, it's helpful to know what our body needs and what we can do to help our body. This is why astrodiagnosis and astrophysiology are such a special benefit, because it ties together the psychology, it ties together the evolutionary intent that we get from the philosophy, and it ties together the scientific knowledge that we get from physiology. That's why I'm trying to do these studies, to learn these things, and this is all just beginning stuff. Now, since Max Heindel is an initiate, it's wise to follow his lead, because he could see and know what was important. Now, when Max Heindel speaks about Jupiter in all of the healing work, the subject that he most often addresses is the arterial circulation. So we're going to do a little bit of a review of that small part of the circulatory system. We'll work our way into it. The general circulatory system has three parts. The arterial circulation, which carries oxygen and nutrients throughout the body. But there is one exception, and that's the pulmonary artery, which carries carbon dioxide to the lungs. The venous circulation carries carbon dioxide and other wastes to the heart for removal. And again, there is one exception, and that is the pulmonary vein, which carries oxygen from the lungs back to the heart. And the third part of the circulatory system is the capillaries. And the capillaries are very tiny little tubular interfaces. And they're interfaces such that on one side they are arterial, and on the other side they are venous. Or venous, I don't know how you pronounce it. And the arteries are capillaries are the most important part, because they are closest to the cells. Not a lot of blood goes straight from a major artery right into the cells. It's when they get fanned out down to the capillary level that they get to the cells.
Richard, excuse me. Did you make a mistake? You said the pulmonary artery brings carbon dioxide to the lungs.
From the lungs to the heart.
Okay.
Yeah. No, from the heart to the lungs.
The very first artery.
Yeah. Normally what goes out of the heart is oxygen. But but carbon dioxide goes out of the lungs, out of the heart to the lungs in order to be dispelled. And the oxygen from the lungs everything that comes back to the heart is a vein. Everything that goes out from the heart is an artery. But in order to get the carbon dioxide back in the little alveoli in the lungs, it goes out through the pulmonary artery. And what comes back to the heart is the vein from the lungs, and that's charged with oxygen. All right. In general, the heart is the center of the circulatory system. And the general overall circulatory system is ruled by Aquarius. the opposite sign. You might say that the heart is the center, and then way out the peripheral is the Aquarian quality. Now, the circulatory system is an extremely large topic. It's something that we could spend all kinds of talks on it. So again, we're going to have to limit and have a smaller scope of things. We're going to address only arterial and capillary circulation in the cranium. We're going to look just a tiny little bit at the phenomenon that is called stroke. And we're going to look at the three conditions which we can avoid or bypass or ameliorate stroke. Max Heindel is very clear about this, and if you study physiology, it becomes exceedingly clear. A stroke is a condition that occurs when blood cannot reach an area of the brain. And when blood can't reach an area of the brain, oxygen doesn't get to the brain cells, and they die. This is why people who've had strokes are often semi-paralyzed, because brain cells that would control those movements have been destroyed. So we're going to look at there are several different reasons for strokes, and we're going to look at 3 reasons for strokes, and we're going to look at the 3 most important reasons. The most common and preventable reason for a stroke is clogging. Small arteries and capillaries build up plaque on the linings of their walls. And the plaque is composed of cholesterol and other fatty substances. No surprise, Jupiter rules fatty substances. Jupiter also rules indulgence in rich fatty foods. When not utilized correctly, Jupiter overdoes everything. Everything gets involved in. Now, for this factor, vegetarians have a reduced likelihood of stroke, because vegetarian food, in it we don't eat a lot of fatty foods. We don't eat a lot of heavy oils. So the likelihood of plaque buildup is less for us. And actually, here we go again, fresh, green, leafy vegetables can actually reduce atherosclerosis. This is a joke that's running through all these talks, and every talk each time I mention the importance of fresh, green, leafy vegetables. And then there are other vegetables that can scoop up the cholesterol so it can be hauled away. And those are called soluble. Edgar's the person to talk about this. Soluble fiber. What? Eggplant and okra. What?
Okra, sowing seeds.
Oh yes, okay. So Edgar's made a major study of this. And those soluble fibers can actually reverse the collection of cholesterol. On the other hand, whole milk dairy products, which are high in butter fat, are dangerous. They're dangerous for us. Now, the part of the psychological problem is Jupiter is extremely positive, and sometimes it's over positive. It can't say no. Jupiter says, oh, it's always going to be all right. It's going to come out well, until it doesn't come out well. All right. The second preventable reason for stroke has to do with the structure of the arteries. The arteries have thicker walls than the veins. And this is because they have to contain the higher blood pressure that comes out of the heart, because the heart's driving things to the very periphery, to the tips of our fingers and toes. Now, we know from the Rosicrucian teaching that some of that is done by the spirit itself right in the blood, that it drives the blood, but still a large part of it is due to the heart. So there are several layers of tissue in the arteries. And one of those layers is a heavy muscular layer. And that heavy muscular layer holds the vessel in shape. Again, diet affects the strength and resiliency of arterial walls. Some foods, like refined sugars especially, weaken muscles. Many years ago, I had a friend who was a professional boxer, and several days before he was going to fight, he would never eat any sweets. He says, I know that if I eat sweets, they're going to weaken me. So if we have a regular diet that has a lot of sugar in it, we're weakening the muscles. And when they're weak, the pressure of the blood causes the arteries to stretch. And when they stretch, the blood will pool. And it'll lower the pressure. Both the pooling and the lowering of the pressure does not allow the blood to get to where it needs to be in the brain. If there is extreme relaxation of the muscles in the cranium, it's what is called an aneurysm. That's an extreme where everything bulges out. In fact, they will actually blow out. There can be burst arteries. Not many people live through that. Aneurysms are things that can be relieved by invisible helpers. Invisible helpers can actually go in and sort of like you pinch on a hose that's bulging out. They can do that, and they can help the muscles to be retoned. But if a person's going to turn around and eat all kinds of sugary foods again, the same thing is likely to happen. Assimilation. There's a difference between absorption and assimilation. Assimilation uses the word that we use in similar. And different things go to different parts of the body. When we take in oils, the oils go to the heart. The heart wants only oils because it needs that for burning. But for mental work, sugar is necessary, not necessarily refined white sugar. So a lot of sugar is going to the brain anyway. So we have to be careful about what kind of sugar is going there. So we come now to the final preventable reason for stroke, and that is hypertension. Hypertension is the physiological name for high blood pressure. No matter how strong the arteries are, if the blood pressure becomes too high, it'll produce conditions similar to those as when the arteries are weak, that produce aneurysms and burst arteries. Now, there are various different things that can produce and reduce hypertension. Some of them are physiological. I think it's tomorrow we're going to look at horoscopes. In the morning we're going to look at horoscopes of people who have strokes and who we say in the vernacular that they blow a gasket. Now, the things that can be done to lower blood pressure, one is really, really very simple. Having a diet that's not rich. But the thing that we have to be careful of to keep low in our diet is sodium chloride. Now, from the very first talk, we have said there are two families that are important in all of physiology. There is the solar family, which is potassium and phosphorus and manganese and magnesium. And if we look at the lunar family is called the sodium family. And we saw how important that was in order to get pure water into our body out of the large intestine, which is something like a sewer. Sodium was all important in that. So we see that we want to keep a low sodium diet. Because if we have a high sodium diet, where sodium is ruled by the moon, water is ruled by the moon, and so where you have sodium or a high sodium diet, there's going to be more water. And when there's more water in the blood, you're going to have high blood pressure. Just as simple can be. I'll mention something that's really not nice. It's a vivisection experiment that was done. They took dogs and they force-fed them salt and more salt, and they kept drinking water and kept drinking water until they had massive burst arteries. Just to prove the fact that you can find very simply other ways. So, we have three things that we can do. We can avoid rich fatty foods, we can avoid foods that weaken muscles, and we can avoid excessive salt intake. All of them are likely to greatly reduce our likelihood of having a stroke. In fact, the salt even produces intoxication. Salt stimulates the desire body, which was created in the moon period. It's ruled by the moon. I find in myself that if I take in salty foods, it doesn't take long and I'm having lascivious thoughts. It really is something. All right, this is something that is very simple. There is an astrological side to it, and that astrological side demonstrates to us the truth of what Max Heindel said when he said the majority of illnesses and conditions that people have can be bypassed or gotten around altogether by proper living. And in this case, the proper living is diet. So, we have a little information about Jupiter. None of this is very deep, none of it's very heavy, but if it's helpful, that's what counts. All right. We'll close with the Rosicrucian student's prayer. O God, increase our love for Thee, so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Everybody's going to go home and throw their salt shakers away. I don't mean to say these things to frighten people, but, sometimes things have to be said. Yes?
The issue with the low salt, when I was in my late 20s, I was working on a farm, and I was thin and very strong, and we were outside, and I was eating a very good diet, and careful with the salt, and I got these cramps.
Yes.
And later on, and I was craving potato chips.
Yes.
And later on, when I went to massage school and we were doing the physiology,
Yep.
you need salt
Yes.
for those muscles, for that water balance.
Yes.
And I was sweating so much walking outside in the summertime.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I would drink lots and lots of
Yes.
water. I was getting water in. I would chew rhubarb to help me through. There's so much.
Yeah. What you're saying is moderation.
Well,
there are times that you have to take in some salt.
And you're sweating things out. You've got to.
Yes. Yes, but
So I'm just saying.
Yes.
I was trying to be so healthy, and it was harmful to. I was killing myself with health.
Yes, I suffer from this very same thing.
Yeah.
I have a hereditary predisposition to cramps in the calves of the legs, and if I get too low on salt and I sweat too much, I do get cramps. And so you just have to use sense about all of this. You can't be fanatic and say, I'm not taking in any salt.
I was trying to be fanatic.
Yeah.
I was trying to
No, I understand that.
and very careful.
Yeah.
And it was just, but at that time, low salt was just being pushed. This was many
Yes.
years ago.
Well, you can get better sources of sodium than potato chips.
Yes, I know.
But celery.
I knew something was wrong.
Yeah.
Celery is salty. Yes.
Celery is a good natural source of getting the sodium into you that you need. Yes.
Is the sea salt any better, or is salt?
No, it's from an ionic standpoint. The only thing about sea salt is that it gives you a lot of different things, and sometimes vegetarians lack iodine, and you have to have a source for iodine, and you can get that from sea salt. But what I do is I use kelp. I use kelp as a condiment. When I make my evening meal, I sprinkle it with kelp, and then I get my iodine from that.
The United States dietary daily minimum requirement for salt is 2 grams per day. That's what they say. That's what they teach.
But you say that whole milk is dangerous?
Yes, you have to be careful of it because of butter fat.
I love whole milk.
What's the point of having 2% milk and 1% milk?
That's what I think.
Yeah.
My son said it's processed white shoe polish in water. He said that's what skim milk is.
Well, Max.
Skim milk is water with white shoe polish.
Max Heindel drank whole milk, but he was drinking raw milk. And yeah, but Max Heindel also had a lot of heart problems.
That was because of us having raw milk.
I'm not sure. I'm not certain of that. Look at his horoscope sometime and then decide. I'm not certain one way or the other.
Richard, we had kale juice the other night. We tried to drink it raw. I just thought of you.
Yeah.
What did you do? You worked out.
What?
Oh yeah. Okay. Kale juice raw.
Well, you have to. I love it now at this point, but you have to develop a taste for it. If there are people that are stupid enough to develop a taste for Scotch whiskey, we can develop a taste for green juice.
That's all you have is the kale. You don't get.
No, I this morning in my kale juice I had yellow dock weeds. I had garlic chives. I had rutabaga greens and turnip greens and 2 varieties of kale and collards and beet greens and Swiss chard, and that was my green juice.
You don't put any sweetener whatsoever.
No.
That sounds very decadent, Richard.
My body loves it.
Bothering about stuff.
My body loves it. And it isn't really. I've taken some things that are supposed to be healthy that are gruesome. You grit your teeth to try and take on. But this one, yeast. Yeah, it's supposed to be healthy.
Worried about because I'm going to
found your own diet for yourself, haven't you?
Oh, yeah.
Straight down.
Change it every once in a while.
Yeah. Yes, that's true.
Yeah.